The courtroom was silent, too silent. No whisper, no cough, no rustling of papers whatsoever. The atmosphere was thick, almost palpable, as if the very walls, ceiling lights, and sets of eyes in the room had all converged to see a moment that would turn everything around. Christine Brown stood by the wooden witness stand, her hands flat against its front. She felt the cold, smooth wood beneath her fingers. Her hands shook, but her back was straight. Her breathing came slowly, controlled, resolute. She wasn't there as a woman who had been injured. She was there as a woman who was finally willing to talk. On the other side of the room, Kody Brown sat at the defense table. His arms were folded across his chest, his face set as if chiseled from stone. But even from afar, Christine could sense it. The tension in his jaw, the fact that his foot tapped quietly beneath the table. He was attempting to appear in command, but she knew him better than that. This wasn't confidence. This was the silence of a man, fearful of the truth, eventually coming back to him. Robyn Brown sat next to him. Her fists entwined in her lap, she didn't dare meet Christine's gaze. Robyn had always had a talent for turning away when it got too intense. Christine wasn't mad at her. No longer. But the accumulation of years of unspoken anguish weighed heavy on her chest. And this evening, that silence was going to be shattered. The judge's gavel came down once. Court is now in session. That noise had been a thunderclap in the heart of Christine. She closed her eyes briefly. She thought of her kids. She thought of all the nights she had cried softly so they wouldn't know. She thought of the woman she once was, the woman who smiled in pain. That woman had disappeared now. When she opened her eyes once more, they were resolute, steady. She moved forward, Christine gasped, and her voice resounded in the room. Gentle but resolute. I gave you loyalty. I gave you my young years. I brought up your children. And what do I get in exchange? You made me feel invisible. For a moment, no one stirred. No one even dared to breathe. The words landed in the room like a sledgehammer. Not boisterous, but heavy. Kody didn't wince at first. He gazed at her. His mouth compressed into a tight line. His pride was always armor. Thick, cold, impenetrable. But Christine could see the flash in his eyes. She'd lived with that man for years. She'd learned to read even the slightest change in his face. And in that flash, she saw something he'd never say out loud. He knew she was correct. Kody's attorney shifted in his seat, feigning interest in his papers, but obviously moved by the weight in Christine's words. Even strangers could sense what was taking place. This wasn't a straightforward testimony. This was a woman ripping apart years of scabs. Scabs she'd kept closed, in order to hold the family intact. Christine stepped forward again. Her hands did still shake, but her heart was firm. I begged for love. I begged for room in your heart. But the only thing I received was a reminder that I wasn't enough. You picked Robyn. Again and again and again. The instant her voice broke, you could practically hear the intake of breath from everybody in the courtroom. Audience members blinked back tears. Even the judge leaned forward a bit, not to interject, but to hear better. Robyn dropped her head. She was ready for this. She knew that Christine would drag her name into this. But to hear it said was another thing. It wasn't just a statement. It was a knife slicing through years of secrets well concealed. Robyn's eyes blazed. She attempted to keep herself together, but guilt has a way of seeping through the best rehearsed masks. Christine stared right at her now. Not to fault her, but to take in the reality. I used to think that I was being too sensitive. I used to lie to myself and say, you didn't hurt me intentionally. But each time we sat at the dinner table, every family function, every time Kody's eyes would wander to you when I was speaking, it spoke volumes to me. I no longer felt like a wife. I felt like a shadow. Robyn's throat constricted. She blinked furiously, but the tears still rose. Kody shifted restlessly, now sitting forward, as if attempting to take charge of the situation with his stance. But now he couldn't talk. It was Christine's turn. Christine directed her attention back to the judge. Her tone softened, not weakly, but in a different manner. The strength of someone who had weathered storms. I'm not here to exact revenge. I'm here to finally have my say. I want my children to know. Their mother didn't shut up. The judge remained silent. He didn't have to. The weight of what she said hung in the air enough. Christine's chest expanded and contracted slowly as she went on. Her eyes watered, not with fear, but with release. Do you have any idea, she said, her voice level, what it's like to be in a marriage where you're a ghost? To lie next to someone who sees right through you? To hear the laughter in the next room and know it's not yours anymore? She swallowed. Her lips quivered, but she did not stop. I used to mark down the days Kody returned to me. I used to get all dressed up, cook dinner, make up excuses for his not being there. I said to myself, he still loves you. He just doesn't have time. But I wasn't stupid. I noticed how his love changed, how his time with Robyn extended, how his phone calls became brilliant, how I transitioned from being a wife to being an afterthought. The gallery was quiet. Even journalists dropped their pens for a second. This wasn't rumor mongering. This was unvarnished human suffering. Christine's voice grew deeper, bearing years of burden. The worst part wasn't losing his love. It was losing myself. I looked in the mirror one day and didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. I had become quiet, too quiet. The Christine who laughed easily, who danced with her children, who dreamed of love. She was fading. She pressed her hand to her chest, as if holding herself together. But I stand here today because I need that woman back. I need my daughters to understand that love never needs to make you feel less. That silence isn't strength when it's suffocating you inside. Kody finally moved forward, as though wanting to interrupt, but the judge bestowed upon him a look that said, "Not yet." Christine's eyes met his, and for the first time she did not appear to be the woman who loved him. She appeared to be the woman who survived him. "You mistook my kindness for weakness. You figured since I didn't scream, I wasn't hurting." Silence isn't forgiveness though. Silence is pain without a voice. And I'm finished being silent. One tear trailed down her cheek, but she didn't brush it off. She wanted him to notice, to sense the burden of all that he'd neglected. When you went out of your way to sit next to Robyn, when you forgot birthdays, when you skipped anniversaries, when you treated me like just another task, something in me died a little every time, and you didn't even see. Kody's face was not stone anymore. His eyes sharpened and his lips parted. A flicker of guilt, or perhaps merely discomfort, flashed across his face. Robyn glared at her lap, her fingers clenched around the tissue in her hand. She'd always said to herself, Christine was strong, that Christine could take it, but now she understood. Strength doesn't equal unbreakable. Christine's voice grew quiet, but that quiet carried more power than any shout ever could. "I'm not the villain. I'm not the broken one. I'm just a woman who finally learned to stop begging to be seen." The courtroom remained frozen. Every person inside felt it. The honesty, the rawness, the unbearable weight of her truth. She looked at her children sitting in quiet at the rear. Their eyes were wide, but they looked at her with something new. Pride. "This," Christine breathed, "is not about hurting anyone. It's about saving myself. It's about ensuring my children understand their mother stood up, even when it was difficult." The judge nodded slowly, his eyes saying nothing about her bravery. Christine took a final deep breath. The trembling in her hands had stopped now. Her heart was still beating fast, but it was steady, like a drum announcing the start of a new chapter. "This is my voice," she said firmly, "and I'm never losing it again." As she stepped back, the silence didn't feel suffocating anymore. It felt powerful. It felt like the world had finally heard her. Kody gazed at the table before him. The armor of pride began to crack. Robyn was frozen in her seat, her eyes fixed on the floor, comprehending that the legend she had held on to all this while was unwinding before the whole world. And Christine stood upright as she had in years. For a few long seconds after Christine had spoken, the courtroom didn't seem real. Everything seemed to have come to a halt. The air, the light, the people. The magnitude of her words still lingered in the air, too much to be dismissed. You could have heard a solitary pen fall. One person in the back sniffled softly. The judge shifted uncomfortably, his face grim but not unyielding. He had witnessed hundreds of cases, thousands of statements, but few that bore this sort of raw human gravity. Christine was standing there, catching her breath. Her heart continued to race, but something deep within felt lighter. She had finally spoken what she had kept hidden for so long. Kody Brown didn't say anything at first. He glared at her, his expression tight. His hands, clasped on the table mere moments before, were now clenched around the edge so tightly that his knuckles went white. The man who never wanted to lose control suddenly looked trapped, and he disliked that. His attorney leaned in towards him, muttering something under his breath, likely advising him to remain calm, to stand firm. But Kody wasn't actually hearing him. His brain wasn't back in that court anymore. It was racing through every second Christine's words had pulled into the open. Christine's eyes did not flinch. For all these years, she'd looked down at him. For all these years, she'd tiptoed around, not wanting to cause drama. But now her eyes locked onto his, like steel. I pleaded for love, she whispered softly, almost as a confession. I pleaded for space in your heart. But the only thing I received was that reminder that I wasn't enough. You chose Robyn. Over and over again. A wave of murmurs passed through the audience row like a sudden gust. Eyes met, some aghast, some nodding, some visibly shaken. Truth had a tendency to pierce every facade. Robyn Brown tensed in her seat. She had anticipated the hearing of her name, but having Christine utter it so freely within a courtroom, to the entire world no less, was a far cry from that. She clutched a wad of tiny tissue so hard that it almost ripped apart. Her gaze swayed between Christine and Kody, her mouth clamped shut to prevent herself from speaking. Kody's jaw snapped shut. He leaned forward at last, his voice breaking the silence. That's not true, he said, too quietly for the judge to rule it official testimony, but loud enough for Christine to catch. Christine's head canted to the side. Her face didn't contort with rage. It didn't have to. It was tranquil, controlled. And that tranquility chilled Kody more than any yelling ever could. Oh, it's true, she said quietly, but firmly. And you know it. Kody leaned back once more, breathing hard through his nose. He resented not getting the final say. For years, in their home he always did. But this was no longer their home. This was a courthouse, a place where the truth spoke for itself. The judge leaned forward just a little, his eyes on Christine. Mrs. Brown, he said gently. You may proceed. Christine nodded. She wiped one tear from the corner of her eye. Not because she was breaking, but because releasing the past was never clean. She turned a bit toward the jury and the audience, but her words remained focused on Kody. Do you have any idea how many nights I waited? She spoke softly. I waited for you to come in through the door. I waited for you to ask me about my day. I waited for you to take my hand again, like you used to when everything felt real. She took a deep breath, paused. But you never arrived. You were always somewhere else, with somebody else. Robyn bowed her head. She felt the warmth of the room bearing down on her. Christine's words weren't only bitter, they were real. And everybody could tell. Robyn hadn't intended to get everything taken away. At least not yet. But love wasn't being shared equally in that house anymore. And Christine was the one who had lost it. Christine's tone came out more firmly now. Not louder, but clearer. When you love somebody, you fight for them. You let them feel like they're seen. You let them feel like they are important. But you treated me like a guest in my own marriage. There was a soft gasp from the back of the room. Kody shifted uncomfortably. His attorney put a hand on his arm, reminding him to remain calm, to not answer out of turn. Christine faced the judge again. Her hands were no longer shaking. Her shoulders were squared. She was prepared to tell her truth. Not as a begging wife seeking love, but as a woman standing on her own at last. I'm not here because I hate him, she said. I'm here because for years I forgot who I was, trying to love someone who wouldn't look at me the same way anymore. And I don't want to live like that ever again. I don't want my children to think silence is strength. The judge nodded slightly, drinking in every word. The room was still holding on to every breath she took. Kody suddenly slammed his hand softly on the table. Not hard enough to get in trouble, but just enough to show his frustration. This isn't fair, he hissed. You're trying to make me a monster. Christine's eyes didn't even blink. No, she said gently. You made those choices. I'm just saying them out loud. To a man like Kody, those words hurt more than any yell. His whole life he had lived with power. Power over the story, over the family, over the women who adored him. But in that courtroom, all of that had been taken away. And all that was left was the truth between them. The judge cleared his throat. Mr. Brown, you will get your turn to speak. For now, allow Mrs. Brown to continue. Kody sat back, arms folded over his chest once more, his jaw bracingly tight. He glanced at Robyn for a moment, as if looking for support. But Robyn wasn't looking back. She was gazing down at the tissue in her hand, attempting to maintain her grip on reality. Christine edged nearer the stand microphone. I used to say to myself, maybe someday you'd look at me again the way you did at the start, she whispered. When everything was new and full of promise. But every time you passed by me as if I wasn't there, I knew something. I was falling for a version of you that didn't exist anymore. Robyn's lip quivered. She wasn't being tried, but in so many ways, she was included in this narrative as well. She'd witnessed Christine's suffering. She'd experienced the space. She'd assured herself it wasn't her fault, but at her core she knew she was occupying the space where Christine had been. Christine's eyes gentled, not because she pitied Kody, but because she no longer feared him. I stayed because I believed in sacrifice as love. I believed loyalty was tolerating my hurt. I believed silence was strength. But strength is not silence. Strength is standing here today and speaking all the words I should have spoken decades ago. The audience whispered softly, moved by her words. There were strangers in the crowd who had tears in their eyes. Suffering such as this wasn't uncommon. It was something many knew far too well. The judge shifted a little to Kody's attorney. Does the defense have any response at this point? Kody's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, we'll reserve our statement for the defense portion. But I'd like to remind the court that personal pain does not automatically equal legal fault. Christine turned her head toward him slowly. No, she said, her voice steady, but silence does equal suffering. And I've had enough of that. The lawyer hesitated, because what could he say to that? Robyn finally whispered something softly, barely audible. Christine. Christine's gaze shifted to her for the first time. Not hate but tranquil clarity. I don't blame you, Christine replied. I blame the manner in which I let myself vanish. Robyn's eyes welled over with tears. She could no longer contain. She gazed downward, her shoulders shaking. The judge cleared his throat once more. Mrs. Brown, is there something else you'd like to say? Christine took one last deep breath. She looked straight at Kody, and this time, her voice didn't shake at all. You taught me something without even realizing it, she said. You taught me what love should never feel like. And for that, I'll never let another man make me small again. Kody's eyes widened slightly, not with shock, but with a sort of quiet understanding. He wasn't losing control. He'd already lost it a long time ago. Christine edged slowly backward from the stand, her heels clicking softly against the shiny floor. Every step she took felt like a chapter closing behind her. She passed Kody without glancing at him. Robyn, the years of unvoiced pain. The judge sat back. The bailiff swung the side door open, so she could sit down on the plaintiff's side. The crowd stayed still, fearful that any movement would shatter the force of what had just occurred. Robyn finally turned to Kody. For the first time, her eyes didn't have trust in them. They had fear. Fear, not of Christine, but of the truth. Fear of what the courtroom had already shown her. Kody rocked back, gasping, his fists still balled on the table. For the first time, the man who never lacked an answer did. Christine slowly sat down, breathing deeply. A few tears still escaped down her cheeks, but they were not tears of weakness. They were tears of release. For the first time in a long while, she felt heard. Kody Brown sat rigid in his seat, fists closed at his sides, pale knuckles standing out against the shine of the defense table. For so long, he had been the one dictating the discussions at home, in family gatherings, even on television. But here, in this courtroom, he was nothing more than another man to be weighed down by the power of truth. The silence in the room after Christine testified did not seem neutral. It seemed heavy. It weighed against him like a wall that didn't exist, pushing him to sit with words he didn't want to hear. Words he couldn't twist into something else. He sat back in his chair, pushing out his chest, attempting to appear calm, but the break in his mask was beginning already. His jaw clenched. His breathing became shallow. He did not like this sensation. He did not like being out of control. The judge gazed over at the defense table. Mr. Brown, he said quietly, You can make your reply. Kody's attorney leaned forward, speaking in a low, urgent tone. Keep it measured, he cautioned. Don't make this emotional. Let me lead. But Kody shook his head. He didn't want anyone to talk for him. Not anymore. He pushed his chair back. The creak of wood scraping against the courtroom floor ringing out like a gunshot in the silent room. Kody stood up slowly, squaring his shoulders. He gazed at Christine, really saw her. And for the first time in a long while, she wasn't the same woman who used to drop her eyes before him. She was unflappable. He resented it. Kody headed to the stand, his lawyer nervously keeping a step behind. Your Honor, the lawyer started. My client would like to address on his own behalf. The judge nodded. Proceed. Kody swallowed hard, holding the edges of the podium a bit too hard. His voice, normally smooth and even, sounded low and strained. This isn't fair. Those few words made the crowd lean in their seats. Some heads canted. The mood changed once more. Not to Christine, but to Kody. He hesitated, trying to catch his breath. She's making me into some sort of monster, Kody went on. As if I didn't care. As if I never gave anything to this family. Christine didn't stir. She sat in her chair with her hands clasped on her lap, quiet but vigilant. She had listened for years as Kody spoke in this manner, transmuting pain into spectacle. But today she was watching him deconstruct. I did everything for that family, Kody declared more loudly. I worked. I constructed a house. I had responsibilities that no one else could even dream of. Do you think it's simple being responsible for so many people, so many children, so many feelings? His voice broke, not with sadness, but with anger. He shot Robyn a rapid look. She nodded infinitesimally, her head jerking up and down, as if attempting to urge him to breathe. I was pushed to the limit, Kody went on. And yes, perhaps I spent more time with Robyn. But that doesn't say I didn't love Christine. It doesn't say I didn't do everything I could. Some folks in the audience shared quiet glances. They'd been watching this family for years. They knew his trying never quite added up. They'd watched Christine smile through loneliness. Christine leaned forward ever so slightly, not interrupting, just regarding him. And that regard alone constricted Kody's chest. She wasn't intimidated by him anymore. That power he once wielded, gone. The attorney attempted to put a soothing hand on his arm, but Kody yanked it away. You didn't think I saw her suffering, Kody blurted out, his words tumbling faster now. I did, but I couldn't change everything all at once. I couldn't be everywhere all at once. Everyone demanded I be the ideal husband to 4 wives. It is impossible. His voice rang out crisp and clear in the room. The judge pushed forward, his brow arching up, gesturing for him to bring his voice down. But Kody was already losing command of his own line. Christine knew what this life was. Kody barked. She consented to it. She was there at that altar, and consented to being a part of this family. She knew I was going to have more than one wife. She knew I couldn't provide for her everything. Christine rose slowly. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The unspoken strength in her mere presence made him stumble for one heartbeat. Her attorney softly whispered, Christine, don't answer yet. But Christine never took her gaze away from Kody. He cleared his throat once more, trying to suppress his feelings again. I did try, Kody continued, now speaking in a lower tone. I did try to be a good husband. But she always made me feel as though whatever I did was not good enough. Like whatever I gave was not enough. Christine finally broke her silence, softly but firmly. Because it wasn't love, Kody. It was control. The room fell silent once more. That one sentence pierced through all that he had uttered. Kody stiffened. His throat bobbled as he gulped down a mouthful of air. He attempted to glare at her, but her unyielding gaze did not waver. For years she had remained silent when he spoke loudly. Not any longer. You tell me I consented to this existence. Christine went on quietly, moving a little closer to the podium. But I consented to be loved, not to vanish. I consented to create a family, not to be a stranger in my own house. The words stood there like the residue of smoke after a firecracker. The kind that clings long after the noise dissipates. Kody's lips curled open, but he uttered no words for an instant. His attorney cleared his throat anxiously. but stayed silent. You're the villain in this scenario. Kody finally lashed out. You're saying all of this is my fault. I bore this family for years. Without me, none of this would even be here. Christine cocked her head a little bit to the side, her lips spreading into a soft, sorrowful smile. And yet, she said, you're the one who let it fall apart. Robyn stared down at her lap, her fingers wringing the tissue in her hands until it frayed at the edges. She had always thought that Kody was able to talk his way out of anything. He was always the most boisterous voice, the one who dictated the tone of every conversation. But now he sounded not so much like a man with answers, but like a man struggling not to drown. The judge leaned a little closer. Mr. Brown, he said calmly but firmly, please maintain answers that are concise and respectful. Kody forced a nod, but his chest was now heaving. He wasn't accustomed to being held responsible like this. Not publicly. Not in front of Christine. Not in front of individuals who weren't part of his controlled reality. Christine made her way back to her chair slowly, never removing her gaze from him. Kody attempted to rebound. I loved her, he whispered, nearly begging this time. I was not perfect perhaps, but I loved her. The words were spoken softly, but no one in the room was believer. Not even Kody's attorney seemed to be believer, because everyone could sense it. It wasn't the type of love Christine had required. It was the type of love that was conditional, controlling, silent. Christine rolled her head slightly, and spoke again at last. Love without presence isn't love. Love without kindness isn't love. Love that makes you feel small isn't love. The courtroom was electrified with a chill. Even those who had just wandered in to see a case were caught breathlessly. Robyn managed to get the words out, barely. Kody, she whispered, perhaps stop. But he interrupted her. No, his voice broke. I'm not the villain here. Christine did not reply this time. She did not have to. Because at that moment, everyone had seen the truth themselves. The self-assured man who had once been the head of a household full of people was falling apart before a judge. His words, once persuasive, now sounded defensive. His explanations, once compelling, now sounded empty. He attempted again to defend himself. I didn't prioritize Robyn over Christine, he said staunchly, his voice becoming sharper. I clicked more. I felt more heard. Robyn's stomach turned at those words. She didn't want to be the cause of Christine's pain, but Kody had just verbalized what Christine had felt for years. Christine's eyes flashed with a shadow of pity. That's precisely what I'm talking about, Kody, she said quietly. You didn't pick me, and I finally quit pleading with you too. The judge leaned forward slightly in his seat, his expression unreadable but interested. The members of the jury remained silent, their gazes trained on the two of them, not because this was some form of entertainment, but because they were witnessing a long, painful truth unfurl in real time. Kody eventually dropped back into his seat, his shoulders sagging. The fury in his voice had exhausted itself, replaced by something softer, something nearer to defeat. His attorney winced softly, massaging his brow. This was not the forceful, contained statement they had rehearsed. This was a mess of emotions. Robyn set a trembling hand on Kody's arm, but even that did not seem to stabilize him. For the first time, the man who could always spin the tale couldn't command the room. Christine looked down at her hands for a moment, then lifted her gaze to the judge. This, she said softly, is what living like this felt like. Always defending, always explaining, always being the problem in someone else's story. But I'm not the problem anymore. I'm just done. Kody lowered his head. No words came. The judge nodded slightly to indicate that Kody's answer had been heard, but the gravity of the moment wasn't legal. It was personal. The truth had been uttered, as loudly and clearly as it had ever been. And for once, Kody had nothing left to hide behind. The courtroom door creaked open. Heads swiveled. A hush descended on the crowd. Christine pivoted, her breath stuck in her throat. She hadn't expected this moment. Not like this. But when she saw Meri and Janelle approaching the witness stand, each moving so slowly, something inside of her shifted. The judge pushed back his glasses, intrigued. Even the bailiff stood up straight, feeling the moment's heavy weight. Meri walked first, shoulders stiff, fingers intertwined tightly, like she was holding herself together. Janelle followed, calm but firm, her eyes flicking toward Christine. For just a second, a silent message. "We're here." Kody's entire body tensed. His hand gripped the edge of the table so tightly that his knuckles turned pale. He whispered something to his lawyer, but the lawyer shook his head slightly. This wasn't something they could control. "Your Honor?" Meri whispered, moving forward to the stand. "I must testify." The judge paused briefly. "Miss Brown, are you a witness?" Meri swallowed hard. Her voice quivered, but her resolve was unshaken. "I'm here as a participant. As a person who experienced this. As a person who witnessed what was done to Christine. Every day." Christine's eyes sparkled with unshed tears. For years she had cried in secret. Alone. For years Meri had been aloof, stuck in her own misery. But at this moment, she was standing with her. Not in hushed tones, but in public. The air in the courtroom became thick with expectation. The cameras captured close-ups. Journalists waited in suspended breath. Kody leaned forward, his face furrowing. Meri breathed slowly. Christine was the toughest of all of us. Others outside observed smiles. A large family, an idyllic life. They didn't, though, observe the loneliness, the nights she cried when she wasn't being observed. Christine's eyes dropped, tears blurring at the edges of her vision. Those words, those hurts, had lingered in the dark for too long. Meri's voice trembled. "We were all terrified. We settled for less than we deserved, because we believed that's what love was. We lied to ourselves that Kody cared, but we all knew that Christine was being pushed over." Kody shifted restlessly. "Meri," he began, but the judge held up a hand. "Brown, you will be silent until called on to speak." The courtroom whispered in unison. For the first time, Kody was being muzzled. Not by Christine, but by law. Meri stood up. "We weren't wives anymore. We were ornaments in a story he wanted the world to believe." Christine gently wiped her eyes. She hadn't asked them to talk. She didn't want anyone to. But listening to Meri say these words out loud, it was like a hurt exposed to the air, stinging but healing. Janelle went next. Her voice was firm and level. She didn't need to find her courage. She had already decided. "I saw Christine crumble gradually over the years." She started. "I watched her smile even when her heart was broken. I watched her reduce herself, just to occupy a place Kody never created for her." Kody gritted his jaw. "Janelle, don't." But Janelle didn't even look at him. When Robyn came into the picture, everything changed. He didn't just fall in love with someone new. He abandoned the rest of us emotionally. Christine tried to keep the family together. She tried harder than anyone else, but she was treated like she didn't matter. Her voice rang in the courtroom like a bell. Robyn cast her eyes down, her shaking a little in her lap. She felt the weight of all eyes upon her. She had thought for years that what she was experiencing with Kody was love. She did not want to witness how it destroyed the others. But now, their hurt was before her. Irrefutable. Janelle went on. "I recall one evening. Christine appeared to me. She told me she felt like she was disappearing. She told me she could scream and no one would hear her. That devastated me. Because I did hear her. I just did not have the strength to say something. Until today." Christine clapped a hand over her mouth as a quiet sob escaped. She recalled that night all too clearly. The biting air, the sound of her voice cracking as she said those words. She had never imagined Janelle would drag that moment into the courtroom, but now that she had, it was like the truth finally had a place to call home. The judge shifted forward, deeply focused. This was not only a fight in court anymore. This was an admission of years of pain. Meri looked at Christine, her tone gentle but with strength. "We let her bear it by herself. We witnessed her being made to feel insignificant. But today, we take a stand with her, because no woman should be treated like she's irrelevant." Kody's face went pink. He slapped his palm gently on the table, his voice increasing in protest. "You're all distorting everything. I cared about all of you. I tried to preserve this family." Christine left. She quit. The judge at once ordered order. "Mr. Brown, sit down or leave the courtroom. The whispers in the crowd increased in intensity. Reporters scribbled feverishly. Every second, every sentence, every tear. It was all being recorded. Christine got up from her seat slowly. She faced Meri and Janelle, sobbing openly. She didn't have to say a word. Her eyes told it all. "Thank you." Meri reached out and grasped her hand gently. For the first time in a long time, Christine did not feel utterly alone. Then something remarkable happened. Robyn, who had been quiet up until now, stood slowly. All eyes in the room were on her. Her voice shook. I didn't know I took so much from her. From all of you." Kody's head snapped in her direction. "Robyn, sit down," he growled under his breath. But she didn't. She looked at the judge, then at Christine. "I thought he loved me because I was special. I thought I was special. But I see now, what I thought was love was him, choosing me while destroying all of you." Christine's chest constricted. For years she had longed to hear Robyn say the words of truth. She had wept alone, believing she would never find it. And now, in this court, those words were spoken. Robyn's voice broke. "I can't erase the past, but I can tell you this. I witnessed your pain, Christine. I witnessed it, and I remained silent. And that's something that I'll bear with me for the rest of my life." The courtroom was quiet once more. Not the oppressive quiet of terror, but the quiet that occurs when truth has been spoken at last. The judge cleared his throat. "These testimonies detail a pattern of emotional injury," he said with caution. "This is no longer a matter of one woman's suffering. It's about years of silence and disparity." Kody stared at Robyn, betrayal written across his face. "You're supposed to be on my side," he muttered. She met his gaze, her eyes wet, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm on the side of the truth." For the first time, the man who had controlled so much was losing the one thing he thought he would always have: control over the narrative. Christine stood, her words quiet but strong. "For years I pleaded to be heard. For years I bore this suffering in isolation. But not anymore. Today, I stand here not as a shattered woman, but as someone who at last has her voice." The courtroom burst into subdued applause. Quiet, respectful but forceful. Reporters were already live blogging the testimony, transcribing every word. Christine spoke to Meri, Janelle, and even Robyn. Her lips quivered into a weak smile. This was healing, not flawless, not sanitary, but genuine. Quiet was called once more by the judge, his voice stern but kind. "Thank you, witnesses. Your voices will be taken into account in this hearing. This court does not merely hear legal arguments. It hears human truth." Meri and Janelle exited the stand, each of them taking a moment to place a hand on Christine's. A mutinous chain of strength was created between them. Kody sat back, gazing up toward the ceiling, as if he might crawl out from under the walls closing in. His reality, founded on control, favoritism and silence, was collapsing, piece by piece, word by word. Robyn sat silent, tears of sorrow flowing down her cheeks. For the first time, she was not the special one. She was simply another woman, confronted with all of what had been done. Christine took a deep breath, shaking shoulders but a firm heart. For the first time in a long time, she was not alone. She was no longer just sharing her story. They were sharing it together. The air inside the courtroom felt different now. Heavy but alive. What started as a lonely battle had grown into something bigger. Christine's truth had cracked open the walls that had caged her for years. And now everyone was breathing it in. The judge cleared his throat slowly, the echo sounding off the wooden paneling. His expression was even, but his eyes were heavy with what he'd just heard. This wasn't testimony. This was years of suffering, silence, and survival, stripped bare. Christine sat with folded hands in her lap. Her heart beat like a drum, consistent but powerful. This was greater than any fear she had ever borne. Kody sat rigid at the defense table. The erstwhile proud posture had broken down to slouching shoulders. The man who once thought that he owned every story now appeared, diminutive. Even courtroom lights appeared crueler on him now. Robyn dried tears on her cheeks silently. Meri and Janelle sat behind Christine, their faces kind but resolute. They weren't merely observing. They were standing with her. The judge raised the file in front of him. This case is not one constructed on contracts or hard law only. It is constructed on voices, on human truth. The room was totally silent. Even the clicking of cameras ceased. Christine's breathing steadied. She blinked slowly and the weight on her shoulders began to lift. Not fully, but sufficiently to allow the light in. She remembered the years she spent feeling invisible. The nights she'd weep herself to sleep, hoping someday someone would simply say, "I see you." Today the world had Kody Brown, he said, his voice firm. Your willingness to tell the truth in this courtroom is appreciated. Your testimony and the testimony of others has established a definitive pattern of emotional neglect and harm over many, many years. Kody's jaw clenched. The judge went on. You were made invisible in your own home. That is not love. That is control. A sudden gasp coursed through the crowd. Kody's head jerked up. His pride seethed in his eyes. But he didn't say a word. For once he couldn't. The judge placed the papers down on the table. I have heard. I have seen. And I have observed the effect of what you went through. This isn't merely about a shattered family. This is about restoring your dignity. Christine's throat constricted. She clasped her shaking hands together. The room dissolved for an instant as her eyes welled up with tears. The judge addressed Kody. His voice changed. Placid but icy. Mr. Brown, you might think you loved them in your own manner. But love without respect is not love. Love that suppresses and erases others is not love. It is control. It is harm. Kody's eyes dropped, his throat working hard to swallow. He had played the role of the leader, the protector, the one keeping everything together for years. Hearing those words was like seeing that image break into pieces. This court, the judge declared, will not permit Kody Brown to be shackled to this pain any longer. Christine released a tremulous breath. Her fingers clenched on the table's edge. She had waited so long to hear such words. The judge raised his gavel, but didn't hit it yet. Christine, he said softly, before making my final decision, do you want to say anything? Her heart skipped a beat. For a moment she wanted to remain quiet. But then, she recalled the woman she once was. The woman who held back to maintain harmony. The woman who swallowed her hurts to spare others. That woman no longer resides here. Christine rose slowly. Her knees shook, but her back was straight. The whole courtroom shifted to look at her. Cameras rolled in. This was it. The last page of a book she never imagined she'd be brave enough to write. She gazed at the judge, then at the crowd in the courtroom, and then her eyes found Kody. When I married you, she whispered, I believed in forever. I believed in family. In oneness, in loyalty. I gave you my time, my trust, and the best years of my life. And for it, you treated me like a ghost in my own house. Kody winced, but Christine didn't glance away. I pleaded to be noticed. She went on, her voice edging upwards. I pleaded to be loved. I pleaded to count. But each time you picked someone else. You made me feel like a burden. Like my love was something you could discard. Her words struck the room like a tempest. She wasn't yelling, but each syllable was laced with years of suppressed heartache. Christine inhaled deeply. But here's the reality. Kody, I was never the burden. I was the light you wouldn't acknowledge. And I'm finished apologizing for being. The room was silent. Even Kody's attorney appeared rooted. I stand before you today. Not as your wife, Christine declared, her voice trembling but determined, but as a woman who discovered her voice. A woman who will no longer remain invisible again. I forgive you, not because you are worthy, but because I am worthy of peace. Tears rolled down Robyn's cheeks. Meri clapped her hand over her mouth, her eyes welling up with a sob. Janelle nodded slowly, pride shining in her eyes. Christine faced the judge again. That's all. The judge released a slow breath, as if he too had been holding his breath, while listening to Christine speak. Thank you, Miss Brown, he said quietly. That was powerful. Then his voice changed once again. Formal, resolute. This court acknowledges Christine Brown's complete and immediate right to independence, legal and financial independence, and protection of her name, her dignity, and her future. A communal gasp filled the room. The gavel fell once. Bang, it rang out like thunder. One sharp noise that signified liberty. Christine stood immobile for a second, allowing reality to set in. Then her knees nearly buckled as tears streamed down her face. Not the pain tears she remembered, but tears of liberation. The judge's voice softened for a final time. Christine Brown, you are free to walk forward from this chapter. Turning to leave from the table, she refused to glance at Kody. Once, she didn't have to. That chapter was done. Kody remained still, head bowed. He had always envisioned that he'd get his say. But the last say was hers. Robyn, shaking, spoke something almost inaudible. I'm sorry. Christine didn't answer. She just nodded. Not as forgiveness but closure. Meri stood up from the bench, placing her hand on her heart. Janelle was already sobbing. They walked forward and hugged Christine. For years, silence had separated them. But in this moment, it brought them together. The doors of the courtroom creaked open. Light flooded in from outside. Real warm sunlight. Christine passed through those doors like a woman remade. The crowd outside had become thicker. Photographers yelled questions. Cameras flashed like stars. And strangers applauded softly as she descended the courthouse steps. But Christine didn't listen. All she could hear was the beating of her own heart. Strong. Steady. Hers. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, Meri whispered, "You did it." Christine smiled through her tears. "No," she said softly. "We did." Janelle squeezed her hand. "You're free now." Christine looked at the horizon, where the sunlight stretched wide and open. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't scare her. It felt wide, bright, hers to shape. She faced the cameras once more, her voice soft but fierce. "To anyone who's ever felt invisible, this is your sign. You matter. Don't let anyone make you forget that." The crowd applauded, but Christine simply closed her eyes, lifted her face to the light, and breathed a deep, unencumbered breath. The cage was lifted. The storm had passed, and Christine Brown had finally discovered her wings.